Since we met last night, we celebrated the first anniversary of Ronald's death on March 30th. And Ronald continues to be very much in the news and influencing people and articles about him and so on. As I've said, for people who follow this whole series of lectures, that it would be possible by going right along with it all and reading some of his Foundations of Christian Faith to get sort of an overview of what Christianity is all about from his perspective. But it's also possible to pick up each of the lectures or each of the sections in the quarter to get something out of them. So they are really autonomous units, and one doesn't have to be here for all of them to get something out of it. In the back, we do have a flyer for the thing. I don't know if we've really gotten the word out as well as we might have so far this quarter, which is due largely to the fact that I haven't written my next reflections article yet, where we usually mail these things out. But if some of you would take these and maybe give them to a friend or tell people about it, I would appreciate it. They're in the back, and you can get them on the way out or during the break. Also, we have back there the certificates for those people who are taking it for credit. They're in the back, and you can grab one of those and fill those out. Well, we got tonight a very interesting topic, I think, one of freedom, responsible freedom. Again, all of the lectures have to do with searching, as you can see, searching for a genuine charity, for a liturgical piety, for a healthy attitude towards death, for a prophetic spirituality, and finally for a simple faith. So the lectures this quarter have a whole lot to do with our life, the Christian life as we experience it. So tonight, there's a number of problems, questions around the notion of freedom that I'll take up and offer some of Ronald's responses. I'll remind you that this whole series is designed to promote some reflection and discussion on your part. That's why the notes have questions and why there's a prayer connected with it. They're always one of Ronald's prayers that one can say and meditate on this whole topic. And then there's a quote that you could use and take home and discuss with somebody else, and sort of usually try to summarize some of the major ideas that I try to present in the lecture. Well, the first problem of freedom that I want to take up is the most radical one in a way, and that's those people who say that we really aren't free, that we just think we are. We often call those people determinists. The great example of that is B.F. Skinner. Some people know his work, Beyond Freedom and Dignity. Skinner is of the mind that not only are we not free, but that to talk about freedom is really destructive, that it keeps us from doing the one thing that we can really do, and that is program people's behavior. So he thinks that we should quit talking about being free and put all of our energy and effort into setting up situations so that people will behave in better ways. So one could think of a school environment. Instead of appealing to students' freedom, one would try to manipulate the situation so they would behave in exactly the way that you would like them to. Skinner said on one occasion that we really are more like Pavlov's dogs than Shakespeare's angels. In other words, Shakespeare had Hamlet saying, what was it, oh, how like a god. And Skinner says, no, Pavlov with his reflex studies and so on, stimulus-response studies, was more onto it. We're more like animals, in other words, than we are like angels, according to Skinner. And we simply fool ourselves by talking about freedom. He's able to show many ways in which we are determined, many situations where you set it up and the behavior will follow. And there's experiments and so on that would lead one to see that or to accept that fact. So I don't know if that's enough to sort of set the problem for you or not. There have always been determinists around, people who just think that when you theoretically study it and look at it, we just can't be free. We have too many determining elements and so on. I suppose in one way today we're learning more about this. Many of the studies out of the biological realm seem to support that. I mean, There's indications that alcoholism is biologically based, or at least there's a predetermination in that way. Many people think that's true about depression and so on. Much of what goes on in the field of psychiatry these days is based on that notion of giving medication so that people's biological structure will change, or chemical balance will change, or that the brain will function in a different way, and then that their behavior will improve. So Skinner really, is a strong proponent of this determinist viewpoint. Now, Rahner tries to make a very radical kind of answer to that. He's very aware of that kind of problem. And Rahner, as often, will admit a great deal of that. He's not one to be afraid of Skinner and say, oh, we better not have those experiments, and we better not talk about determination in life, and we better not analyze this too much. No, Rahner says, fine, let's go ahead and find out all the ways in which our biology affects our behavior. Let's study all of those things. And he says that in many ways we're going to find out that we are determined, that there's many givens in life that simply are inescapable, things like our intelligence or our abilities to love. At least I think that's part of it. And what country we were born in, what century, whether we are males or females, whether we're so tall, so on. So many givens are just there. And a lot of our life does seem to get determined by all of that. And Rahner says we're better off to admit that kind of thing and not to fight it so vigorously. That's just a part of the way life is structured for us. But then he goes on to say two other important things. And the first one is that we are always free to take up an attitude towards those givens in our lives, towards those factors. That's the one place where Rahner always thinks that we remain free, that it's a root power to decide how we're going to feel about those things, how we're going to react to all those determining factors in our lives. So that someone who wants to be 6'4" and is only 5'11 3/4", has to figure out what to do with that in life. They can walk around being angry about it all the time and think they would have made it in the NBA if they could have been 6'4", or they can come to terms with it. They can end up saying, well, that's how life is. That's what I have been given. I will accept all of that. I will accept the fact that I am only so tall. So that Rahner says this is where we really root freedom. This is the most essential way in which we remain free, no matter what Skinner can tell us about how we're determined. No matter what the scientific world and the behaviors can show us about ways in which our behavior is programmed, we still have that deep opportunity of taking up an attitude towards all of this. I'm reminded of John Paul Sartre's notion of saying that they were never so free as during the Nazi occupation of France, never so free as during the resistance. In other words, what Sartre is showing us is that freedom isn't a matter of just the externals, but it is a matter of what is in the heart, of the inner attitude that we take up. So he said the resistance time in France during the Nazi occupation, Second World War, was the freest of times because it brought forth people's best efforts, because they needed to resist, because they needed to use their wits and intelligence to try to overcome that situation. Never so free. In other words, Sartre and Rahner would suggest that even when we were in prison, we could be free, or even when we were ill, we can be free, because we have that ability to take up an attitude towards what is going on in our lives. And the second thing that I think Rahner would say in response to this is that we can't sell out too soon. We can't take it that all of these apparent givens are the final word. Freud said that anatomy was destiny. It was a way of telling women that they would be in sort of an inferior position always. Oh, and Ronner would say that, well, you can't accept certain givens. You have to challenge that kind of thinking. You have to often say, no, I can rise above. This is only an apparent determinism. Well, we see that all the time in people who are sold short, students in school. Talking to a man recently who, was made by his parents and teachers, always to feel as though he was dumb. It's only now in later life that he's come to appreciate his own intelligence. He is really a brilliant fellow. And now he sees that. He rose above those expectations. He rose above the training and program. He still has that tape. He says his mother's telling him he can't do it. Not bright enough. What do you think you're doing? What do you think that you're really, when he tried to strive and move ahead? But he moved beyond all of those negative messages and went on to get a PhD and is a successful man and so on. Very interesting. Well, what it highlights is this business that we can't sell ourselves short. Very often we think, well, we can't do it. I used to think that when I first started working in the warehouse. I had to work 8 hours, and about 4 hours, and I can't make it. I just can't keep going. And I remember 16 years old looking at big bags. I can't lift those bags. And after a while, there was sort of like a breakthrough point. If I just kept trying to lift them, I noticed a point came like I don't know what, transcended or found that I could do it when I didn't think I could, or it amazed myself that I could keep going. And it seems like that's a trivial example. It seems like we're always faced with barriers like that. And we want to say, no, I'm just determined. I'm only this smart. I've only got this much talent. I'm imprisoned in this situation. I can't improve my marriage. I can't get better educated. I can't pray better. Can't come closer to God. And often those things are just false barriers that we've set up for ourselves. And what is needed is to move beyond them, to keep testing those barriers, keep testing the limits. And very often we find that we are able to transcend them. And on the other hand, as we go through life, we test those barriers. We find some we can't get beyond. There are genuine limits, and part of the wisdom of life is to come to know that. Well, that's the first point, the very denial of freedom, and Ronner's root answer, which is probably the most important contribution that Ronner makes to the whole discussion of freedom, that question of attitude. We always have that root power to change how we feel about things, to take up a more constructive attitude towards the poor situation we find ourselves in, to always try to rise above it in a new way. Okay, I think the key personal question here is for us to assess our own givens, our own barriers, and to try to see which ones are sort of real for us, which ones we maybe need a healthier attitude towards, and which ones we need to think that we can really transcend. Sort of a personal kind of exploration. Why don't we spend just a minute or two in silence and invite people to reflect on that question a little bit. Okay, so we move forward. We'll look at a whole lot of notions of freedom. Such a key idea to understanding ourselves. I think in the quote I gave you from Ronner, from this perspective, because he characterized Christian life precisely as a life of freedom. It's so crucial to the whole understanding of who we are. Well, let me take up a second kind of problem that perhaps we know. It is this sense of an inner impotence, an inability to take hold of our lives. Times when we feel like we can't make decisions, like we've lost a sense of personal responsibility. Maybe we feel paralyzed. I often think maybe that's the way it is. It's like, geez, I just can't go to the store because I don't know what I want to buy. Or, no, I just can't pick up the phone to make this call because I don't know what I'll say when that time comes. It is, in a frightening sort of sense. It produces an angst or an anxiety in ourselves. We feel like maybe I can't cope, like I'm losing control, like I can't handle life anymore. It's a feeling of being overwhelmed in many ways. So I guess maybe, I don't know if everyone experiences that, but sometimes, it is that sense like, well, I don't know if I can make it through today or not. I don't know what I'm supposed to do, or the areas of life are so gray. I mean, am I supposed to, yell at my kids? Am I supposed to be kinder to them? I mean, I don't know. I just maybe sit around and do nothing about it before long. You're supposed to sell the house or keep it. It's just too much, like overwhelmed by the decisions that one has to make. And I think that perhaps we look a little bit at why that might happen to us. I mean, my first comment on it is that it's simply part of the human condition. It's simply the way it is with us. We're finite creatures. Life is complex and difficult. We have limited kinds of abilities. And very often it just seems as though it's built into life, into the complexity and changing character of it, that at times we feel a certain paralysis. There's also the notion afoot that, well, we don't have much control, that we're really driven by our instincts anyway. It's not unlike the previous point I was making. It's Freud's idea that we have these sort of uncontrollable instincts, what he called the id, that is determining our behavior, that it's almost too much for us, that, well, you can't do anything about it anyway. I always, whenever I'm talking about this, I go back to that line from West Side Story where the young kids to the hoodlum type say, well, I'm depraved on account of I was deprived. In other words, they're messed up because of their training, because they grew up in bad conditions, therefore they have this depraved kind of behavior. And so there's nothing you can do about it. I remember my father was always talking about that. He didn't like Freud's thoughts exactly for that reason, because it made it sound like everything was determined in our early years, and then you just weren't free. So that if somebody was abused as a child, then they automatically had to abuse their children. So there is sort of a notion in the culture that, well, there's not much you can do about it anyway. I'm paralyzed, no sense in making some big effort to decide what I want to be. I'm just programmed that way. It is akin, as I say, to the notion of Skinner. Also, there's a whole technology that we live in, what we often call the technocracy. It seems like it's running away from us, like you can't control it anymore, like it's got a life of its own, like science will just invent bombs, and then you've got this terrible nuclear weaponry, and then what can you possibly do about it? And once it exists, it's here. And once we've got the knowledge, how can we ever do anything about it? We'll always have this knowledge. From now on, we'll always be able to blow ourselves up. It's produced what Robert J. Lipton called a psychic numbness, which is akin to the notion I'm talking about here, paralysis, a psychic numbness, where people just want to put their head in the sand and not face the whole nuclear kind of problem. People just say, well, what are we going to do? We're probably going to get blown up. What can I do about it? I can't run the world. The president doesn't listen to me. And so we get this feeling again of paralysis, precisely because technology is run wild and we can do so much even in terms of blowing ourselves up. A lot of times maybe the sense of impotence comes from living in bureaucracy. There seems to be no way to overcome this. I suppose if you want, the fast food people, I think, play to that someone wants to say, well, we'll give you choices. You might want to go in and somebody say, I want it different. Well, it can't be different. If you're dealing with any bureaucracy, you think, well, my situation's unique. Well, you can never get any place because you've got to fit into these categories. The forms are there. You fill them out. You're either 1, 2, or 3, figure it out. You say, well, no, I'm unique. I'm different. Don't you see? And then you never get any place. You're in line waiting and trying to get around it, and people won't listen to you, and your name gets on a computer, and before long it just keeps coming. I remember one guy came from Oregon, a Benedictine, to study at Bowling Green, and his name got on the computer with an Oregon address, so all of his mail went to Oregon and was sent back to him in Bowling Green. He tried for 2 years to overcome that. You know, says, no, I'm here, you see. You just mail it here, then I'll get it quickly. And he could never do it. Never could do it. It just frustrated him no end. No matter who he talked to or how he tried to get it changed, the mail always went to Oregon. Well, that's the idea of the bureaucracy, which then ends up very often making people feel passive, impotent. Well, what could I do anyway? I might as well let him send it to Oregon. What are you going to do? So much of life perhaps induces this whole feeling. Now again, we need some ways to try to overcome this. And I think that what Ronner does, I think, in whenever we're feeling paralysis, is he heightens the stakes for us by telling us that freedom is our root capacity to make ourselves to be what we will be forever. That freedom is this ability we have, or as I put it in the notes, the capacity for the eternal, to shape our existence to be what we will be for all eternity. What he's telling us is that each of our decisions in life is filled with meaning, even the small ones. You know, I have a friend who will not exercise because he says, well, if I exercise today, then I'll have to exercise tomorrow. And then if I do, then I'll have to exercise every day. And it's just overwhelming to him. I mean, he can't do it. He can't get off dead center to start exercising because, if you understand, it's just too much. It's overwhelming. It's like every day of my life. Well, when we're faced with that, it seems like what we have to say is, no, the stakes are high. No, it's not, well, I could exercise or not exercise, I could be kind or not be kind. It's not like that. It's like all those decisions are collected into our psyche. They all are taken on in our personality. They all are shaping who we will be forever. That's why when we talk about sin and venial sin, it seems not good to talk about it as light or as not serious sin. As a matter of fact, very often venial sins are tremendously serious. And they're serious because they have long-standing impact, because we are making ourselves to be what we will be forever. So someone says, well, it doesn't matter if I lie here, one little lie won't hurt, but then they lie again here, and they lie here. Before long, one is an habitual liar, and one wakes up one day and says, I am a liar. That's the very essence of what I have become, because I've done that each point along the way. You understand? The point is that it makes the stakes high for everything that we do in life, all of our free decisions. So I always tell people when they're feeling depressed that it is more crucial than ever to do all the tiny things that one would neglect. I'm flashing on something. When I was in Oxford, a book came back to me called Andersonville that I had read 20 years before. Some of you might know it was about the Southern Civil War, the prison camps during the Civil War. And the point that came back to me was that those who survived, the major message of the book as I recall, those who survived were the ones who did the tiny little things every day, like wash even though they were dead tired. Or, not to get too gross, but to pick the lice out of their hair every day. Well, it became crucial. And when I was studying, that's how I felt about my life. I flashed, I hadn't thought of the book Andersonville for 20 years. And it just came back to me, and it was there almost every day. I can't give it an inch to this thing. I have to stay on top of it. I have to go every minute. The stakes are high. Well, I had set limit of time to do my studies, and it was like I can't let down at any point. Does that make sense to anybody? I mean, it makes sense to me. What was I saying? When people are depressed, And I tell them that it's more important than ever that you do your exercise that day. It's more important than ever you don't eat too much that day. Those are the days when we ought to have maximum effort to not give in to certain things, like eating too much or staying in bed beyond when we should, or 100 other ways of escape. To me, the whole point is now the stakes are higher. On a good day when you're feeling well, so what? You go on an eating binge. Oh, big deal. You celebrate and so on. The next day you'll be all right. But the stakes are higher when we're down or depressed or not doing well. All ways of trying to play out what I think is this where freedom is this root capacity to shape ourselves, to move into eternity, to determine our character, I suppose. Well, that's why I guess we have such care for adolescents as they're going along, that maybe somehow we sense that, well, they're forming lifelong habits here. We don't want them to go in the wrong direction, because we know they'll be plagued by those. They might become part of their character. And maybe we become over-solicitous sometimes. We need to back up a little bit and put it into God's hands. But I think what stands behind that care is the sense that, yes, they could become this kind of person if they keep acting in this destructive way, or this way that we don't particularly like. I feel like we need some questions to make me sharpen my point here. Let me try it in some other ways about once you've got that root notion going. Yeah, that's crucial to me. Did I finish the thing about sin? Yeah, that's why venial sin is not light. That's why it's serious. It could be tremendously serious because of what it will mean in the long term of what kind of a person that we are. Well, after that we try to use some of other psychological techniques to overcome our paralysis. It's almost a way of just getting in gear. I often feel that the most important point is the beginning with things. That I just, when I'm in danger of procrastinating, it's all the effort's got to go in that first moment. Don't give in to the procrastination even for the first minute. There's somebody who has trouble getting up in the morning and always ends up, oversleeping and so on. It seems like the crucial moment is not 5 minutes after the alarm rang, but it's that very next second after the alarm rang that is really the big moment, the great moment of decision when one will determine here how it's going to go, in a sense, for the day. And another technique, is to force ourselves to get into action. Maybe someone who can't pick up the phone and make the phone call, just at least, it's too frightening, at least pick up the phone and sit there with it. Before long, you feel sort of silly. So you think you might as well dial. It's a way of getting with them. Or the same kind of technique to tell some other person that we intend to get off dead center out of the paralysis. So someone might say, I've really tried to confide to a friend, well, I'm not going to eat between meals for 3 weeks. And the reason for doing that, again, is an extra motivation that would somehow get us going, get us beyond that point of weakness or limitation. So very often other people seem to be helpful to us that way. One of the important things, it seems as though when we think we can't get any place, is to be able to imagine a better future. Often in marriage counseling, it seems like very often what happens to a couple is they get to a point in the marriage, it's not good, and it's been that way for quite a while, and so they end up thinking it can never be different. It's always going to be like this. And then they're sitting there, I can't live like this. I can't imagine living 20 more years like this. It's too much. I can't do it. It will tear me apart. I'll lose my very being. And it seems like what is crucial at that point is to get people to be able to imagine a better future. Like, well, it doesn't always have to be like that. We could make some adjustments here. You could refine things. You could communicate better. You could change some of your ways. It could be better. And it seems only when people start thinking in those terms, it could be better, that they're able then to make an honest effort to try to make the marriage work. You see, so part, it seems to me, of getting beyond paralysis, which is what we're talking about in this section, is this ability to dream. You know, organizations are like that. You know, as a parish, you think, well, here we are doing this and that, and good, fine. But part of what we may need to do is to dream like we could be better. This could be a lot better. This is how the kingdom idea functions in the Gospels. The Gospels are a statement about ideals of the kingdom. The kingdom is our tremendous utopian idea where people live in mutuality and harmony and where there's justice and peace and human beings are respected. That's marvelous. And if we're in our Christian faith, that's Jesus' way of giving us something to work toward, of getting us beyond our paralysis and saying, hey, no, we work for the kingdom. We work to try to improve the world. We won't get there. We won't make it entirely, but that's what motivates us to keep going. So part of it seems to be this ability to imagine this better future for ourselves personally, in our relationships, and in our institutions. Well, let me stop there and see if, let's try this. Let's do a one-to-one discussion for a while on that notion of freedom, the problem of paralysis, and well, I meant it as a second kind of problem of freedom. Overall, what I'm doing is just trying to look at the ways we experience our freedom, especially in terms of problem, the way we don't seem to function well. And the second one is simply, my starting point is simply our experience of paralysis. I mean, it's simply the fact that sometimes we don't seem to be able to make decisions well, that we can't figure out what to do. We don't want to make decisions. Maybe that's how it is. I'm tired of making decisions. I made too many decisions. I think that's a lot of people on their jobs who have a lot of decisions to make. I mean, they want to come home and make no decisions. You know, they don't want to even decide what they want to eat or anything. It's just, I think we get sort of overwhelmed with that. So, I mean, I don't know if there was any connecting point. It's just that that's one other way we experience the problem of freedom is paralysis. Then all I try to do is suggest why I think that is. Maybe the thing that I didn't emphasize enough was the fact that one of the things that paralyzes us is that there's often so many options. I could do this or that, and I don't know what to do. It's too much for me in a way. But as far as any kind of connection between the two, I'm not really sure. I think one of the things about the whole analysis is that a lot of the points overlap. It's more or less trying to get a slant on a way into the problem that makes sense to us. I mean, maybe some people latch on more to the impotence ideas, other people into the paralysis notion. I don't know. Yeah, I think in all of the questions asked, isn't there a connection between the paralysis and the attitude? And I'm sure all the way along the line that becomes the crucial kind of point. I mean, of attitude. That's one of the things about the Christian message that we see, and we have to talk before long about how Christianity sees this and so on. But Jesus always is pointing back to the inner attitude. That is what made the difference. And it wasn't the external things, but it is what is in the heart that really counts. And I think that's crucial to us all the way through. Attitude is where we still have the root power. Now, I'm sure if we get our attitudes all in order, the paralysis would be manageable. It can be done because of if we see it right and have it straight and at ease with it and so on.
How common is it that a realistic self-knowledge is a problem?
The question is asked, how common is it that the root problem is that we lack a realistic self-knowledge? Well, I would think that it is very common and crucial. I mean, some people see it as the key to the whole thing. That the whole of life, the problem is self-deception. That was Socrates' notion and Plato's notion of what was wrong. If we could just see it clearly and get beyond the illusion then we would act properly. That's in other words, for them, vice was always a matter of ignorance. You didn't see it, you were deceived in some way, and therefore you don't act correctly. So their idea was that the whole of the way of improving yourself in your life is to heighten awareness, to get beyond self-deception. And therefore their key phrase was, know thyself. And that the more you know yourself, the better able you are to function. Now, I think there's an awful lot to that. I don't think it's the whole picture. I mean, I think it is possible to know oneself in a certain area, to be very much in touch with one's own demons, and then go and act destructively anyway. I mean, I think Socrates saw part of the truth, that self-deception is one part of our problem. But it's also a willful problem, a culpability problem, that even though I might be very much in touch with a particular demon and know how I am prey to that and how it could mess me up, cause me poor behavior, I may, in a moment of weakness, just give in to it anyway. So it's not the whole of it, but it's very important. And what it tells us is, that self-deception has to be unmasked, doesn't it? That we have to try to be rigorously honest with ourselves. One of the things that I would do with procrastination always, or paralysis, as we're talking about, is ask why. Why is it that someone is on dead center? And that seems to be a crucial question, so has to figure that out. I mean, someone who can't write a paper, and it's going on about this, they put it off, can't seem to get it done, then have to ask it. Maybe it's a perfectionism. The reason they can't write that paper is because it's got to be perfect. And they know they can't write a perfect paper, therefore they're not going to write it. Very often that's what happens to people in graduate school or whatever. They just can't get it done because it's got to be perfect. Perfectionism. That's one example. And for other people, they can't act because they are fearful of the consequences. And they can't accept the responsibility. I don't know what to do. I'm not going to take responsibility for this. It's one of my points. I'll get into that later on. But, I think unmasking our illusion seems crucial to developing into a freer person. Where do we get subtly programmed? Where are we just swept along and where we are drifting but we don't take hold? And why is that? I mean, those would be the questions that one would want to ask. They're very crucial. I mean, that's part of knowing ourselves, improving our behavior.
I was just going to comment more than one reason for a difficulty of God.
Sure.
Perhaps it may not be maybe an attitude, maybe a environmental problem.
Sure. And you might not ever be able to figure it out. That's an important thing to be said. Well, I just found myself, I think, helping a gentleman very much. He had a possibility of important project. It seemed everything was ready and open to receive this and to do a really important thing in life, and he just couldn't do it. He just couldn't get going. And he kept racking his brain about, am I doing this just to make money, to get more status, or am I really doing it to serve people? And he couldn't get that straight. And part of my response to that was, Ronner's clear notion is his term, freedom is dark. But it's not ever possible to get to the bottom completely of our motivations. Always we could probably say that. We never know for sure exactly why we're doing something. Our motives are often mixed. We can't be sure we got it all sorted out right. Some of it escapes us. And so what I told the gentleman is just that. You probably never will figure it out if you're being selfish or if you're being service-minded here. Probably a little mix of both in there. And maybe if it's going to do some good, you just ought to go ahead and do it and deal with the selfishness factor later on. And so I think just that reminder would free him, a lot of people, up to go ahead and act without ever being able to know. That's another way of getting off dead center, I think, is just to realize you very often can't get it all clear. Can't figure out. I like that phrase of Ronner, freedom is dark. It is ultimately a mystery. Freedom is so crucial to us. We are free beings. It's so much at the center of us that we can never parse it all out, never unmask it entirely. It always eludes us in some way. It's always deeper than we are able to penetrate. It's especially clear in the question of motivation. So part of my thing is this whole idea of living spontaneously. A lot of times they just say, well, if the results are good things are happening, just go ahead and do it. You know, don't spend all day trying to figure out my motive's pure. A lot of religious training was like that, and I figured out first, uproot that bad motives and so on. I mean, it just paralyzes people very often. They become excessively introspective. And have figured all that's what's behind a lot of often the scrupulosity problem. People are always worried that everything is a sin. They can't get that all straight. Or they're worried about whatever they're doing. So yeah, the motive question and the inability to sort that all out seems crucial to really uncovering what freedom's about. Shall we try? Yeah. I don't know that would be necessarily true. No, I think probably there would be different dynamics going on and maybe different choices. But each of them would have trouble deciphering it all. I wouldn't say that's true. We have our unique way of making decisions, and I think healthy personalities have more together. They're more likely to act out of strength and weakness. Okay, let's take an example. There's two husbands here. One is very self-actualized, got his head together, and so on, and it's Valentine's Day, and he ends up buying a present, some candy, to bring home to his wife. He does it because he loves her. Seems like a nice thing to do. He doesn't feel a need to do it. He isn't afraid that he's going to get yelled at if he doesn't do it. That's the right thing. So he ends up bringing candy. Now we can think of another husband who brings candy also, but it's altogether different. He's acting compulsively. Let's say this man is not together. He's afraid that his wife will be mad at him if he doesn't do it. He thinks, geez, I got to get this done. He doesn't really, really like to do it. He's not doing it out of love or out of generosity. He's doing it out of fear. They both end up getting candy. They both probably, the wife gets candy in both cases. They both probably don't fully understand what made them do it, but it's altogether different. Totally different. One based on a healthy personality, in the other case, a person who's struggling with neurotic problems or poor self-image or bad relationship or 100 other things. So no, I wouldn't mean that way. It's just that no matter who we are, we never totally get to the bottom of it all. No matter how mature we would be, parts of our behavior would always elude us. And I think there always would be a mix in all of our behavior, even the healthy people, always a mix of some negative elements, maybe some selfishness, self-interest, so on. I don't think we often get to pure altruism. I don't know if we ever really do. Purely altruistic act. I've said this before here, that was Camus' remark to the Christian act of altruism, is it really so altruistic when you know you're going to get to heaven if you do it? Even there's a self-seeking motive. Yeah, you got to follow. Sure. Right, yeah. Yeah, well, I think that, sure, and it will probably be experienced differently. Compulsive behavior usually doesn't come across well. Behavior out of fear usually is detected in one way or another. I think the other person doesn't feel it. It's like love that's demanded doesn't really feel the same as love that comes freely and generously. Maybe yes, maybe no, but I have a lot of cases where you will get a complaint by a spouse one way or the other, like, I don't think they're really into this. Well, I don't think they really feel it. or I think that she does it just because she knows that I like it. I mean, that's, I think, pretty common fear, maybe. I often hear it in terms of questioning, like I'm not so sure. I don't often hear people say, well, I just know he does that because I demand it. I don't hear that so often. It's more like, I got my doubts kind of thing. But yeah, I think that's detectable, don't you? I mean, very often, not always, but a lot of times I think we pick up signals that way. Someone is doing something out of obligation rather than out of care. Pardon me? Right, and that, of course, what do you have to do in that case? I mean, that you got to talk about it, right? I mean, there's really no other way to find out. It's always the business of assumptions. We always bring assumptions. You can't avoid them, but it seems like one of the healthy things is to clarify them, to articulate them, and to check it out. One of the things we need to do is I think we're going to move into any other questions. We're going to do another section, but maybe if people move around, they will not freeze to death. Why don't we take a 5-minute break and exercise? All those who do not do freedom with a sense of independence, of autonomy, of lack of ties, of I might just try to, to give a little bit of history of this whole thing. If you go back to the Enlightenment period, that what thinkers started to grapple with at that time was that people were so imprisoned in organizations and structures, especially the church. The people were just a member of the church, and the church told them what to do, and so they weren't really free. They didn't think for themselves. And so part of the project of the whole Enlightenment period was to free oneself from all of that, to get rid of those external constraints, so that the person's real job in life was to think for oneself and to figure out who one really was. We have great thinkers that have influenced us a whole lot that we could probably cite in all of this line of thinking. There was Soren Kierkegaard, who wanted to put on his tombstone the individual. Kierkegaard's a 19th century person. He kept saying that, what we really got to see is that we're individuals. We can't just do what the herd says, what he called the group, the herd. You can't just do that. You have to think for yourself. And you can't just do it because the church says, because the church is messed up too. You can't trust it, in a sense. Therefore, you as an individual have to respond. He was very big on this unique call from God to the heart that goes beyond all rules and so on. That's why his great hero was Abraham. Abraham, who was willing to do the ridiculous, absurd thing of killing his son Isaac, because he heard the call from God that it was moving beyond the ethical norms where you don't kill people, and that call was so precise, so individual, that Abraham was willing to go against all custom, all tradition, all family feeling, blood, what his wife Sarah would think about, and so on, because he was answering the call of God. So for Kierkegaard, Abraham really is the hero figure, the person that we ought to try to emulate, so we have this religious response to God. Friedrich Nietzsche, later on in the 19th century, kept claiming that what we need to do is create our own values. He talked about moving beyond good and evil, getting to a situation where we decided what we value, nobody else. That's why he was big on the death of God. You get rid of God, then now you see Kierkegaard had God in the picture. Nietzsche says you get rid of God, then you will really be autonomous. Then we'll separate the real heroes from those lesser people. Because the people who really got it will take hold and create their own world, create their own values. So you see what I'm trying to develop is this sense of individualism that comes to bear on our own situation today? Well, we're the heirs of all of that. You know, we live in a culture that's been shaped by the Enlightenment. And then not only that, but we get to a country, the United States, where if you don't like what's going on in this colony, you go found another one. And if you don't like it there, you keep moving westward. And there's always space there. There's always a new frontier out there. Freedom gets identified with having space, with having elbow room, without having any time. Well, and then we begin to get into our popular understanding out of that whole experience of cowboy, who probably didn't have all that neat a life, but in the movies and in the popular mind, the cowboy sort of got his name. He rides off, you know. I mean, he doesn't have these ties, doesn't have the connections. He's really free. He can ride off wherever he wants, rides out of town. So that we get this, try to build up for you this sense of individualism that's in our culture. Now, I think that all of that talk is probably heard differently by males and females in the culture. Because one of the things that I think that Carol Gilligan has shown so clearly in her book, A Different Voice, is that as the young boy grows up, he necessarily needs to disassociate himself from his mother. In the traditional families around his mother, he's there, and what he needs to do is to push away, to get distance from. He's always afraid of getting pulled back in by his mother and getting dominated by her. So he needs to in various ways rebel against, to push away. And you begin to see that sounds the same kind of thing as this cowboy of riding off, of getting away. Now, I think that very often, as Carol Gilligan says, for girls growing up, they tend more to identify with their mother. They come together. There is relationship. They want closeness that way. Also, they want distance in teenage years and so on, but there isn't a growing up period. They want that closeness. Well, anyway, take that for what it's worth, but it seems to me that what we produce in the culture as a whole is a sense of freedom that is largely freedom from ties, freedom from control by others. It's a very autonomous notion of freedom that we end up with in this country. It's sort of symbolized by the motorcycle. Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, that one book. You know, the free person gets on that motorcycle and they just take off. There's nothing around them. It's got air around them. No, I think for many of us who don't ride motorcycles, the car does the same thing. Car is a sign of freedom. Oh, and it's very autonomous, isn't it? You know, it's usually one person driving in this car, going off, free to go where they want. So we've got this identification with freedom here. Freedom from all of these external controls. Freedom from parents and so on, the teenage rebellion, all of that. Well, now, what it seems important in out of the Rahnerian perspective to say, well, that's a necessary stage, but that's not what real freedom is about. That notion of freedom has to be attacked as being limited. If you think you're free just because you can get on a motorcycle and take off, then you don't know what freedom is really all about. So it has to be rooted in a larger context. So one of the ways that we would try to say that is that freedom is social. That is, that it has to do with connectedness. So we are never really as autonomous as we feel or as we think we are at some point. We are really social creatures. We are dependent upon others. So as we grow up, we might want to distance ourselves from our mothers or our parents, but we really need them yet. We need their love in order to come to maturity. We need them to be with us throughout. all the way along the line, we need other people to feed back to us something about who we are, to challenge us to become better. We need to be put into communities where we are able to grow and develop in a healthy way. So part of the answer to this is to try to locate freedom in a larger social context. That's what so many thinkers are trying to do today. They say the Enlightenment doesn't have the final answer. You know, we go back to Karl Rahner, who we're talking about in this whole series. One of the great quotes from Rahner that I like, and I guess I use a lot, is that he said, I fear my own subjectivity. I fear my own individuality. Well, because even this brilliant man was afraid of just going off alone on a horse by himself. He said that's why he needed the church. He said he needed the church. Oh, because it rooted him, because it gave him a larger context within which to move. I guess every time I talk about this, I probably say the same thing when I'm thinking about Flannery O'Connor, the Catholic short story writer who died of lupus at the age of 39 and wrote those marvelous short stories. And they said to Flannery O'Connor, well, doesn't being a Catholic restrict your creativity, cut down on your freedom? And she said, heavens no. Being Catholic gives me a world within the function, within which my creativity can be developed. Gives me my space. It clarifies things. In a totally amorphous world, we're really not free. We're just floating around. Freedom has more to do with rootedness than that, with being fixed in a place, of having a context within which we move. You see, she says, no, being a Catholic gave her a world. You understand? A symbol system, a whole thing that she could bounce off of and use in her creativity. So that all of that is by way of trying to say that somehow that freedom really is social, has to be understood in a communal context. We're dependent on others for life and for growth. We come to know who we are and come to our better selves only in relationship. So that freedom, as I often like to say it, is really a function of closeness, of intimacy. Our freest moments are not when no one's around, we can get away from everything and ride off by ourselves. It seems like our freest moments are when we are close and intimate and have someone who loves us and where we feel like, yes, I can develop now, I can go about my business, I can be my better self because this person supports me, because this person is with me, because they trust me, because they love me. So I would suggest that if we look at our experience, yeah, there is a liberation about getting in the car and going off. When I was in England again, I didn't have a car for all that time, and I felt constricted. I couldn't go where I wanted to go a lot of times. Too far away, or I couldn't have time to get there. And I know when I came back to the United States and had a car again, it was terrific. You know, I was like a 16-year-old again. I guess I like to get in the car and just go. And so there is a sense of liberation about autonomy and not being tied and not being dependent. I think there's no doubt about that. No, but it's not the last word to be said about freedom. It's not the whole of it. And I think you look at an alternate experience from that is the experience of closeness when someone really cares about us and trusts us enough to let us go and to be our own self. Then we know freedom in a new and richer way. Then, you know how freedom is tied in with development and growth and feeling good about who we are in relationship. I suppose there's another way of trying to say this whole thing as well, and that is that in life we are not just free from things, from external restraints, from parents, from a church, from a state, but we're also free for. And this is a commonplace, and we often talk about this. This isn't just Rahnerian thought, theology, but it's still important to say we're free for things. This is where the responsible freedom comes in that we're talking about in the lecture tonight. So that it isn't just to get away, it's to be able to do. Freedom has to do with being generous in response to others, in forming healthy relationships, in being committed, in trying to produce a better society, and try to spread the kingdom, try to create the community of love. All of those things is what we're free for. That's what gives the spice to life. after a while, just being free from restraint doesn't mean much. One says, I got to get on with it. I have to do something with this opportunity that I've been given. I have to serve others. And, haven't we had that sense maybe in our culture to speak positive about we enjoy freedom here, and one of our impulses has been where we want to help free other people. We would like other people to have the kind of freedom that we enjoy here. We've said in the past that we fought for that, fought for freedom, so that others could have this opportunity to have options and so on. One needs to reflect on what that means in our culture. Now, if I try to put that together, we're talking about what freedom as being independent, but also a sense of dependency. I need you. I need your feedback. I need the community. And ultimately, we need God. And we have a word that captures that suggests the ideal, and that is the very interesting rich word, interdependence. That seems to capture what we would want to be as free people. We want to be interdependent. It is, we want to have a proper sense of independence combined with a sense of dependency, so that those two things go together. So we're talking about marriage relationships again, so that the situation would be not a clinging dependency, in that way that gets compulsive and drags the other person in and so on, but an interdependence. A sense of that one has an autonomy, a life of one's own, that one can make it on one's own, one can handle one's life, one has one's own contribution, but one is able at the same time to share that with another person. I often use that phrase in talking to the young people. One of the best postures to get married out of is something like this. I could live without you, but I choose to live with you. What that does is remove the element of compulsion. It makes you get the sense of interdependence. Two people walking together in the same direction. I could live without you, but I choose to live with you. I could make it. I wouldn't be destroyed. I'm not entering this relationship because of a sense of inadequacy. I enter it out of strength, out of confidence. Therefore, I make a better partner in this whole relationship. That's something what I would mean concretely about interdependence. And again, I would suggest that the best of our relationships have that kind of quality. Why don't we do our one-to-one discussion again for a couple minutes, and then we'll have some opportunity for questions and see how we react to all that. I could feel the vibe. Well, I might pick up on that in terms of Frankel's book on the concentration camp and the way he used, I don't know if he would say he used imagination in that way to survive in the camp. He used to imagine his family, think about his relationship with his wife. That's the title of the book is The Man's Search for Meaning. And his thing was that the external constraints, the worst imaginable kind of situation, the concentration camps, the Holocaust, and all that, which is almost unspeakable as we talk about these days and remember that and so on. Say tonight there's a service at the temple in Sylvania talking about that, or remembering that. But Franco survived the camp by using his mind. You know, that's broadening out his statement about thinking about it, but imagining himself in free situations and so on. And he feels that he learned one of the keys to life that way. You know, about finding meaning in any kind of situation, which partly is what I was developing, was to imagine alternatives, to be able to project out of our spiritual capacities ourselves into other situations. I think it's very similar myself to, you know, the point that was made about attitude again that Tim was talking about. You know, it comes back to that, which might be a broader term for saying what you're trying to do in a very circumscribed, constrained situation. That is, you're trying to adjust your attitude towards that. Part of the attitude might be that it ends. You know, that if I can just object to this, you know, again in the camps, many people thought that they would be liberated on a certain day, and if they weren't, they died on that day. You know, so I mean, there is a great power in that whole ability there. So maybe part of, you know, the way we try to free ourselves from oppressive situations is precisely by that. That's Rollo May's technique for overcoming depression, of being able to force oneself or move oneself or be helped to imagine the better future, imagine a different situation than one is. You got to start the dreaming process before you can move beyond it. You know, someone said to me at the break, you know, that's the trick, isn't it? How do you get that first dream going? Or how do you get your mind off of the oppressive situation? I mean, I could respond to what you're saying in a lot of ways. It seems to me in any situation we find ourselves, there's always some elements that are good and some that aren't. And part of what we try to do, at least, is to focus on the good side of it. You know, the elements that seem to work for us. I mean, I think when we get focused totally in on the negative, the way we are imprisoned, maybe it's in our own selfishness, maybe it's in terms of a relationship, maybe it's in terms of responsibilities or whatever. I mean, just to focus on that sort of defeats us. And it seems like what we're trying to do is to get our minds on some other side of it. I mean, you see that about people, don't you? I mean, the situation can be marvelous and almost everything is good, and all they want to talk about or remember is the one bad thing that was there. And you can do that. Again, I often say this, but that was a Chinese brainwashing technique used against our servicemen in Korea, in which they actually killed them through this technique. A lot of our fine young men just laid down in a bed and died for no physical reason. And because their captors forced them to concentrate, cut off all support systems, all lines of command, and so on, and forced them to focus on the negativity about themselves. It became too much to bear. Marvelous book on that whole question by William Lynch called Images of Hope, where he talks about the importance of imagination in cultivating freedom, becoming a full person. So I guess what I've done is take your word thinking your way out and to broaden it into attitude, into imagination, into total person effort to not get zeroed in just on the negative side of the situation and to try to get out. I think very often then our behavior seems to follow from that. And I think we behave better if we're in tune with options, I think. Anybody else want to direct us here? Or we launch again? Okay.
Well, I think it's sort of ironic in this country that's so high on freedom, you know, really a long time, very often, that people, more and more young people, especially are getting addicted to smoking and drugs, which is really good enough.
Here the question is, it's ironic in our culture that where we celebrate freedom, where it's so important to us, and many of our young people find themselves imprisoned in the drug scene or acting compulsively. Well, I think that an advanced culture like ours, an affluent culture, simply brings its own problems. We have kind of problems that are new in the history of the world because for the first time, we have all of our needs taken care of in a way that other cultures have never known and couldn't even have dreamed about. And we have this much longer time to live, and we have this adolescence in our country where that gets extended. Like you had in other cultures, you had the rites of passage. I mean, you were a youth, and then you were an adult, and you knew what day you became an adult. You were expected to act as an adult. Now that isn't clear. When you're supposed to start doing that, and it's really hard, isn't it? I mean, you can't. Adolescents can't figure that all out. They're still, we've got students here at college, now they're 22, still dependent on their folks, still paying the bills, still not earning their own living. They are dependent in a way, and they go home and their parents tell them what to do, and so on, and how they're going to act under their roof, and they get mixed signals. And so you got this extended, what was when Gabriel Moran here, I often like to quote this, he said that his idea of the life cycle was not with Erickson and those stages and so on, Fowler. His idea of the life cycle was there was youth, and then there was this long adolescence, and then there was old age. And that sort of, you get that sense, it's hard to know when you're supposed to be this adult. It seems like so many of us are still striving. A priest friend of mine said that he was going through adolescence. He was 56, and he said it's a hell of a lot harder at 56 than 18, I think was his comment, And so we have this sort of extended problem, and it creates problems around freedom, doesn't it? You just have the parents of teenagers get up and recite all of that for us. It creates real difficulties. They want to be free. They want to have freedom in all these different ways, and yet they are still dependent, and they know that, and that bugs them, and they don't know how to put that together, and the culture doesn't help them. So the problems are sort of built in, and then we've got the anxieties, and we got so many options, and that's one way of thinking about freedom is the tremendous number of options, and the young people have that. They can do so many things now that maybe were not possible to a previous generation whose life is much more circumscribed. And then that seems to create an anxiety in them. I haven't dealt with high school students for so long, I sort of forget what that was like, but I remember when I was teaching that the high school students very often wanted to be circumscribed. It was too much for them to have total freedom. They wanted their parents to say to be in at 11 o'clock. They wanted to be able to say to their peers, I got to get home. Mom, kill me. But really the kid wanted to get home or needed a way to get out of the situation that he didn't know how to handle, didn't know what to do about it. So, it seems to me they needed that very often, that kind of limit or needed something to bounce up. I often talk about that in religious terms, that the young people often experience what I call the marshmallow effect. As they grew up, it seemed as though their parents didn't stand for anything, or they didn't know what their religious convictions were, or they were part of the super culture where everything went, or their parents were afraid to say what they believed or what they had learned to be true from all their hard experience, and they kept thinking, well, these kids all know these things, and they know what to do, and all of that. And I think it really hurt the young people. They need something to bounce up against. They need adults around who stand for something and say, I have principles, I've learned some things in life, I have a wisdom here, and I'm not going to just pretend like you know as much as I do. You just don't. And let's get that straight. And it seemed like the young people need that. They'll rebel then, of course, but that's part of the way they figure out who they are. You get the specific point that you make about the drugs. I'm not sure. I don't think I understand that. I don't know. I know the peer pressures are great. But why does it happen at a younger and younger age? Is it boredom? Is it just the in thing to do? It's very confusing to me. Just like the suicide problem is so confusing, isn't it? What is that? What has become a high killer of our young people? The inability to cope, too many options, too much pressure to succeed, all these things that you hear. Very frightening world for those young people. Again, I'm just making observation. I don't know. When you get to that, I feel, there's some missing links. I feel like there's things we don't understand yet about what's causing that sort of really destructive behavior. I don't feel I have a handle on it anyway. You talk to individuals and see why they're messing their life up, and very often you see, well, poor self-image, or they're in rebellion, or they don't feel like they can do anything else, or it's the way to get into the crowd. They feel out if they're not doing drugs and so on. But as overall cultural analysis, I have trouble figuring that out.
Part of it could be, it seems to me when I was very young, you had high hopes, you were going to do something with your life and everything. And it seems like a lot of young people feel kind of overwhelmed.
The comment is made that in the previous time, maybe people had high hopes, something that sort of motivated them, and that very often today it seems like we just don't have those kinds of options, that young people don't have that feeling. I don't know. What we know with the nuclear thing, that many of our young people think they're going to die in the nuclear holocaust. That has to be a factor in their thinking. It's very confusing. I don't know that we're going to get a total answer to that tonight. Very conscious of people freezing. Shall I make a final comment here or what? I don't know what to do. Are we ready to go home or... let me make very brief comments on some of the other points I was going to make, and then see if there's any final questions, and reassemble with our coats next week at Tuesday and bring a friend. I don't think it would be fair to talk about the whole question of freedom without bringing in the political, social, and economic side of it. While a lot of people, and our affluent young people, they got too many options. They got too much going on, too many choices to make. They're overwhelmed by it. Most of us are in the same boat, the people who assemble for a class like this. We've got a lot of choices in life. But we got to realize that there's all kind of people whose real problem of freedom is they don't have choices. They're imprisoned in their world. They don't know how to get out of it. They don't know where to go. So we think of the youth living in the ghettos, in the inner cities, and so on. The high rate of black teenage unemployment, just like you were saying. No hopes really. How are they ever going to get out of all of this? What does freedom mean to some of those people you see in the pictures in Africa? Do you want to even talk to them in Ethiopia about freedom? Well, where's the humanity there? So, we got our own sets of problems that I've tried to talk about, paralysis and boredom and all of that, impotency and so on. But we got to recognize a whole group of people in our world who don't have alternatives. And when we want to respond to that, we have to give them that. As we say in our Catholic Church these days, we don't want to give them a handout, we want to give them a way out. What we're going to do is to give them options, opportunities for job training, or to make something of their lives, to grab hold and so on. When freedom of many people in the world is diminished, our own freedom is somehow diminished. Again, I'm on the Holocaust tonight because of the commemoration, and what was it, Pastor Nemo? I never get it straight, but I know the feeling is, he said, they came to get the Jews, and I said nothing because I wasn't a Jew. They came to get the Catholics, and I said nothing because I wasn't a Catholic. And then they came to get me, and there was no one left to stand with me. When freedom is diminished in some way, for others, we are hurt. Now, that's not direct. We can still get in a car and drive home tonight, even though there's people living in ghettos and starving. But somehow, in a more mysterious way, we are connected in that way. And I can't explain that, but I really believe it's true. That somehow when some people on this earth of ours, this globe, that's what Teilhard always said. Teilhard de Chardin was big on the fact that we live on a sphere. And in a way, our westward movement here, you could always go west for freedom, but eventually on a sphere, you don't go anyplace. We're all here together on spaceship Earth. That's what Joseph Campbell, the great theoretician of mythology, said, that when we went out into space, looked back on the earth, we would never think the same. And one of the ways we would never be the same is in terms of freedom. And we understand our freedom is connected in with what's going on in the whole world. And that's how when others suffer, we suffer. Well, some people haven't caught up with that yet. They don't have a cosmic sense. They don't know that we live in a global village. But the more advanced thinkers in our culture have a feeling for this. So what it suggests, of course, and what Ronner is big on, is that if we are Christians in our response, then we see Jesus Christ as being the fullness of freedom and one who came to liberate the captive. That was one of Jesus' main messages, was bring freedom to those who are in prison. And that becomes, we're going to be a follower of Christ and a Christian, take Christianity seriously. It means trying to help free these people up. Maybe that means praying for people in Ethiopia. Maybe it means getting some money to care, to help take care of them. Maybe it means supporting enterprise zones or something in our whole economic structure. But it means being in solidarity with those people. That's what Jesus, Don Sr. in his talk on miracles, which was so terrific, had a sense that Jesus in solidarity with the outcast, with the unfree in his society. So he reaches out across the chasms, across the gaps, and touches and heals. The meaning of the miracle stories of Jesus, he reintegrates them into the human community. And it seems like as followers we have to be conscious of that. Again, how do we do that exactly isn't clear. We have to keep searching for these alternatives. So that's sort of a thumbnail sketch of a political sense of freedom and how there really, I think, is a distinctive Christian response to that based on Jesus breaking barriers, reaching across the gaps and chasms in his society and calling upon us to build community, to draw in, to liberate the captives, to give options to the people who have no options. And that's hard. I mean, whenever we've been in a situation, we were talking at the break about people who have had employment and then don't have it. When people have all their lives known they have a job and then it's suddenly taken away. Well, I mean, that is an overwhelming kind of experience. It's to be caught up in a world that many people in the culture know all the time. That is, what do I do? How do I get hold? I am powerless. Bishops are good on this in their economics pastoral. That is, they say that one of the problems of being poor is that one's powerless. One has no freedom. One has no option. That's the big problem. It's powerlessness. It says, like, I don't count, like I can't make any difference. I can't make anything happen in my world that I would like to happen. Well, let me complete my comments then by going to the thought that Ronner shares with John Paul Sartre, and that is the notion that we are condemned to be free. Condemned to be free. Sartre gives us such a heavy tone. That's really, we're under a sentence. You can't escape your freedom. Can't get away from it. That's what we want to do, because it's too heavy. It's a burden we carry. But we can't get away from it. It's the Christian idea again. Dostoevsky's Grand Inquisitor. The cardinal tells when Jesus comes back into 16th century Spain, and the Grand Inquisitor, the guy who has to put the heretics to death and keep the people in line, puts Jesus in prison, and then he says to Jesus, no, you have to do this to people. You have to treat them like sheep. They can't be freed. The burden of freedom is too much. It's only those of us who are the leaders. We've got to take over their freedom. We have to supply for that. We have to keep them in line and tell them what to do. And he tells Jesus, you made a mistake 1,600 years ago in freeing the people. Shouldn't have done that. And now you're trying to make the same mistake and come back again and free. But we know you can't do that. People can't be free. They're too weak. They're like sheep. We have to watch over them. Powerful passage in Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov about what freedom is all about here and the problem of the burden of freedom. So Sartre says that condemned to be free, we can't get away from it. So much as we'd like not to have to make decisions, sooner or later we have to make them. And even not to make them is already to decide in a way for a particular course of action. And Ronner's response to this whole feeling of being condemned to be free is yes, there is a feeling about that. That's true. You can't escape it. But, and that is in the prayer, the note I gave to you, there is a way out. The way out of that imprisoned feeling is through the grace of God. That there is a power that's beyond our own power. There's an ability to carry the burdens of life that we can't even imagine. There's an inner strength that we find when we think we can't keep going that surprises us. No, there's a way in which we are able to accept our freedom even though it's so burdensome. And that, Ronner says in your note there, that it is a gift. It's the God's work. It's the Spirit's work that can move us to be able to bear the burden of freedom. So while Sartre gives us such a pessimistic kind of feeling, like life is nauseous, it's too heavy, and you just can't bear this freedom, this being forced to choose, being responsible for ourselves, our shoulders. He talks about weighing us down. The burden of the world is upon us. Ronner says, yeah, there's truth to that. That's true. We can't escape our freedom. You can't even do it through suicide. Suicide is no good because you can't escape from your freedom anyway. And it's not a real viable option because it doesn't accomplish what you want it to accomplish anyway. So that what Ronner says, the burden of freedom can be carried. It can be to say, my burden is light. That's the paradox of it all. By accepting it, carrying it with grace, one finds it's easier to carry than when you're fighting it. To be able to commit oneself, reveals truth and beauty and goodness about life that one will never know if one doesn't freely commit. It's all that there's a paradox of the gospel. As we say, we do not seize it by force as freedom, but rather it is given to us by God, insofar as He gives Himself to us throughout all of the imprisonments of our existence. Always the force of God in all of the times we feel burdened and cut off. Well, I'm going to stop there. I have a feeling it's a good time to stop in general. I would appreciate it if some of you, these are back here, if you know a friend or could put it on a bulletin board or give it to a pastor to put in the bulletin or something. I'd appreciate you taking some of these and spreading the word about the rest of our lectures. We'll be here next week and talking about searching for a genuine charity. Hope to see you guys.